All right, I guess Josh needs to move his mic, and then we'll be all good.
I'm ready.
I'm out.
Oh,
I got stuff.
no one was gonna see.
I think
That
I
wasn't
think we
about
should
them.
totally air one podcast one week where we're all just goofing off like this. It's all the beforehand.
Welcome back to installment number 6 of Pastor Rise, coming to you from the comfy couches of Oak Grove Baptist Church this week. We'll be looking at Matthew chapter 26 through 28 primarily. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Michael. And where are we going this week?
If you haven't caught Pastor Randall's sermon, then go ahead and stop here, go watch that, and then come back. Because a lot of 26, Pastor Randall covered a lot of this this past Sunday, just yesterday as we're recording. So yeah, check that out first. But coming in to chapter 26, this is Jesus, where they're starting to plot against Jesus more fully and more explicitly. They had plans and probably thoughts in their head, but now they're getting to the point where they're starting to specifically plot how they can get rid of Jesus and still have their hands being clean. And so we see chapter 26 opens up with this. And so I'll turn it over to you guys in terms of Jesus predicting his own death and his crucifixion. And he's telling his disciples this. But at the same time, he's giving a specific timeline on this now. He's saying in just 2 days, in 2 days from now, this is what's going to happen. And so that may become even more relevant as we go into the anointing too.
The amount of times that he mentions that he's going to die, even just in this one chapter, and they're still really surprised when he gets arrested.
And when it comes to the religious leaders who are afraid of the crowd, one of the things that I was kind of noticing is, in my mind, I was trying to figure out what were the 3 options that they had. So they either believed, or they didn't believe that he was a true prophet. They knew that he was a prophet, and yet they wanted to do just as their ancestors were going to do. And Jesus has already told them this, that, you guys are the ones who, and your ancestors were killing all the prophets, every prophet that was sent to you. So either they don't believe that he was a prophet, they do believe that he was a prophet, and they're still going to follow through with killing another prophet, the first one that they've probably seen in 400 years. And then the third option is that they do know, in fact, that he is more than a prophet, which I think probably we're seeing, that's where we're going to land, that these people knew that he was more than a prophet, but they still wanted to kill him. Yeah,
and I think it's been clear through other passages, they were not deceived or confused, they just rejected him.
Yeah.
And so that was the thing.
And all for what? It begs that question, all for what? And for their case, the biggest thing that we can see, obviously beyond the rebellion of their own heart and their unwillingness to surrender, in a sense, but for the law, the religious law that they had, their prestige, whatever it may have been, there may have been, several different issues within their own hearts, of course, with different individuals. But still, they're refusing to acknowledge Jesus as the Son of God and maybe he is the Messiah and those types of things. But yeah, it's interesting to, try to put yourself in their shoes and see, well, why is it? And then how does that relate to today in terms of, where is our heart? And how often does religion get in the way too, in terms of, well, I'm still doing it in my own power. I still desire to do it in my own power.
And I think that, too, again, going back to our takeaway, the true God always threatens the false God. Mm-hmm. And so the idolatry was them, same as with us. They were worshiping themselves. Now, not in a religious way, obviously, but they had the things that they cared about in this life that were so important to them that it was more valuable than what they were willing to give up. Because that was the fear that, if this Messiah comes, we're going to lose our place and our prestige, and the things that are important to us are going to be lost. And so the ultimate idolatry there is they're worshiping self, and the true God is always a threat to the false God.
Mm-hmm. Moving into Jesus' anointing, there is the differences between the accounts, and Pastor Randall mentioned kind of some of that. But one of the things that I do want to mention is within this Jesus anointing, when I'm looking at it again, I'm seeing that Mary was probably one of the only ones who saw, and well, maybe not the only one, but she was definitely one of the ones who saw clearly, Jesus was just talking about all these different predictions of his death. But then she's also seeing and probably hearing, even if she wasn't there specifically hearing Jesus saying in 2 days, the word probably got around.
Right.
Yeah.
And so at this time, she's probably responding to the fact that she knew. It wasn't just some, this is this is just, I thought to anoint him or something. Like, she was actually responding to the fact that he, what he was saying, and she is literally preparing him for death. I think she's kind of already putting the pieces together. And of course, Jesus is saying this for the benefit of the others too. Like, listen, she's got it. She's understanding that this is what's coming. She's heard. Whereas some of the rest of you guys are a little bit slow.
Well, it makes more sense too that she was holding back nothing.
Yeah.
There's like, it's not that we can use this again later. This is it. Time's limited.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and break this thing open.
When I read that it was, in a really expensive oil, I immediately, my mind goes to, she understood Jesus' worth. She understood that Jesus was worth this, extremely pricey oil. Like you said, holding back nothing, dumping the whole thing out. And I think, like, practically the application is we should understand Jesus' worth. And that's where true worship starts, is understanding the worth of Jesus. So that's kind of
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I was thinking about it.
That might preach right there. We should start doing this podcast before Sunday.
Yeah.
What about the Passover? What did you guys notice beyond the yeast? that was good. It was. I mean, it's good to remember that.
That actually got me thinking, because I have a sourdough starter, and
I knew it.
Yeah, I know. You probably can smell it. No.
We have some too.
Yeah. So, where does the yeast come from in that? And the yeast comes from, well, one, the leftover residual stuff that's on the flour, from when it was harvested, but also from the air. Like, it's in our homes, probably in between your toes, which is disgusting. So, like, when I was thinking about,
can we delete that part?
Yeah, like how you have to get rid of all the yeast. You have to be proactive to really try to remove the yeast from your home.
So, with the statement of Jesus says, the one who dipped is fulfilled by prophecy. And this is one of the other things that I kind of want to bring out, because as we move through these, especially in the Passover and especially in how Jesus is betrayed and so many other things, this is prophecy after prophecy after prophecy after prophecy that is being fulfilled and is being proved true. And so even in the one who dipped alludes to Psalm 41:9 and then Judas condemning himself when he's like, surely not I, but he's also dipping, and it's like he knew what he was doing. He knew what he had already done.
And I don't want to glaze past also the idea that this was a very uncomfortable dinner.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it started off well enough, I'm sure, but then at some point Jesus says, hey, one of you guys are going to betray me. And that's where things, the wheels fell off basically right there.
Yeah.
Emotionally, because it says, the scripture says it became very distressed. And so, they're worked up at this point. This is not like, okay, we're hanging out and having fun. Jesus says he's going to be, crucified, and one of y'all going to be the ones that betray me.
One of the things that's interesting is, so as Matthew records it, each one began to say, surely not I, Lord. But then you look at Judas, and it says, then Judas, the one who was going to betray him, said, surely not I, Rabbi. And, there's a difference there in terms of some nuance in that, in terms of, some recognizing as Lord, and at the very least, he's saying teacher.
Right.
And so maybe he's even revealing his commitment and stuff even in that statement. And Jesus, it seems like one of Jesus' favorite sayings, you've said it. Yeah. I don't have to say it. You said it yourself.
Your words, not mine.
Yeah, because this is about to, he's going to say this like 2 or 3 more times as we go through these chapters.
Yeah.
Then we have, along with the Passover, Jesus initiates the Lord's Supper and things that we recognize today, we observe today. Instead of the Passover, we observe the Lord's Supper. And so, again, when Pastor Randall was talking about this, understand that, when Jesus is saying, there's a lot of significance behind, this is my body, which is broken for you. Just dwelling on that and having enough of that by partaking in it, that we are submitting ourselves to the need for Christ's sacrificial death. It's acknowledging, like, every time we take communion, every time we're seeing this, we're understanding that Jesus is the one who has to do the work. It is not us.
Yeah. I think about the celebration of Passover was, they're celebrating their deliverance from slavery. And, we take communion as a symbol to remember what Jesus has done to deliver us from the slavery of sin. And so there's kind of like that parallel there too that I'm, thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll come up later on in the other passages as well.
We're going to wait till we get to 1 Corinthians.
Yeah, we're itching. We're itching to get later on in the year.
If you want something very spurulous from this passage, is there going to be wine in heaven?
Well, we know that was just grape juice. There's Welch's in heaven.
Fresh squeezed grape juice.
No, obviously there was some, for those of you listening, we're going to challenge you a little bit because, there's absolutely no reason why Jesus would talk about old wine and new wineskins or new wine and old wineskins type of deal.
Let's start with the fermentation process.
Yeah. There's some clarity.
Can we talk about how yeast is involved in fermentation too?
Let's don't.
Okay.
I'm afraid we might get some more toe jam up in this place.
The blood being the sacrificial terminology, like that's one of the things that back in the Old Testament I want to bring out for people if they haven't understood it or known it before. When covenants were entered into, they would have these sacrifices and they would even literally cut the animals in half, at least at specific times, and they would walk between. And we see that in the Abrahamic covenant. We see it in some of the other covenants that were formed. And Jesus, we're not letting this go by seeing that when Jesus is saying this is a new covenant in my blood, he is the sacrifice. Instead of the animal being sacrificed, he is a sacrifice. And so there is just layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. So the prediction of Peter's denials, Jesus is saying that, the shepherd is going to be stricken basically, and the sheep of the flock are going to be scattered. And Peter, of course, he's like, even if I must die, I'll never desert you. And so then, of course, Jesus says, well, by the end of the night, you're going to deny me 3 times.
I love this guy so much. He's so fun. I mean, if you're looking for good TV, Peter's got it. If you're looking for truth, maybe not all the time, but this guy is like, man, this is scrappy do. Every time I read it, I'm like, this is scrappy do.
So if you were a disciple, which one would you be?
Let's don't play that game.
And Josh would be John.
Oh, man.
The disciple whom Jesus loved. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, thanks.
So in Peter's declaration, one of the questions that I had was, I wonder if this is confidence or if this is more pride. Is Peter really just speaking out of he really honestly believes that this is his confidence that, man, I am not going to do this. I'm committed. I've given my life, and I'm going to give my life for you, God. Or is it just more of a prideful thing, being this is just how he's lived his life, and so it just kind of comes out of that at spur of the moment type thing.
I think he was sincere in this.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do believe he felt that he would not do this thing, and it's just one of those situations where you've known somebody in your world that did something that you just couldn't believe, right? How could that possibly happen? And here we see Peter, and that is his story. It's like, no, I'll never do that. And then in just a few minutes, he does.
Yeah.
And obviously remorse, regret, but also there's just the shock. It's like, how did I possibly let that happen? And so whenever we see it in our lives or in other lives, it shouldn't be as surprising because there's priors.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he had Jesus has been telling them, but they didn't really know how the next, hours were going to play out.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think the shock of just the moment can also get to you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we tend to single Peter out like we do Thomas and stuff, but the very last sentence of that passage of verse 35 says all the disciples said the same thing.
Right.
So I mean, it's not, at the very least they're agreeing with Peter, yeah, we're not going to leave you either.
I kind of wonder why this came up because, they were on their way to the Mount of Olives and they were singing, and then, maybe in the break of the song, Jesus is like, you're going to all be scattered and you're not going to want to follow me. So I just am kind of wondering about the train of thought. And I think it's because Jesus is already starting to feel the heaviness of the betrayal already on his heart, as he's walking, as we come into the garden and we see his prayers, you can kind of already see the heaviness of the forsakenness. I looked into the meaning of of Gethsemane because I was curious about it, and apparently, that the word means olive press, and so in this garden would have probably been like an olive orchard, and so in the middle of it would have been like this big millstone, and like this basin where they would have crushed the olives, and I think there's some symbolism there as, Jesus is praying in the midst of this olive garden, so to speak. He feels, crushed. And we know that he's going to be crushed, and his, the oil or the blood that is poured out is going to be what's valuable, that's going to cover our sins. So
one of the things in this betrayal and arrest that I first noticed at least was that the chief priests, they sent the chief priests and the elders, they sent others to Jesus. And I'm wondering, so are they still hanging back? Are they actually there? Or is this just a way that they're kind of still washing their hands? They're trying to keep their hands clean. So they're just sending their thugs to do their work.
Feels like the second one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, just noticing that in terms of like they are so, and we're going to see this later on, and in the way that they respond to Judas, that they care more about the law and keeping the law than they care, of course, about people. And,
Sure.
We've seen this already in the
That's
I desire
consistent.
mercy, not sacrifice.
Right.
When Judas comes and Jesus sees him, he still calls him friend. I thought that was interesting just in the fact that friend, do what you are here to do. It's not like Jesus is being even harsh with them. He's kind of being compassionate in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Within this too, the Father protecting the Son, he could send 12 legions of angels right now. There could have been, like, if God the Father wanted to save Jesus, then he would have.
Right.
And so there's no doubt within that. And so the only logical explanation beyond that is that this is actually part of the will of the Father.
Yes. And when I tell you, one of the takeaways for me in that passage is that, when we're suffering in this life, it's not because we have been left or forgotten, or it's that this is part of the process. Yes, God could send angels and change things. He can make it different if that were part of the plan, but instead this is part of the plan.
Yeah.
And so there is some comfort in that for me, and the fact that God is doing something, even if we don't understand it, or even if we don't enjoy it, for lack of better words. But there's some comfort in knowing, okay, but this is only happening because God has allowed it, and if that's what He allows, then it's good. He only ever does good, and even though it doesn't feel good, and it's not, it hits different emotionally, I guess the reality is I can trust by faith that there's something greater going on than just my emotions, and that God is developing something and doing something and creating something, and all His I's are getting dotted and all His T's are getting crossed, and I get to be part of that, even though there is some cost in this life for that, but there's some joy that comes with it as well.
Finishing out chapter 26, when Jesus is condemned by the Sanhedrin. So he's there and lead him to Caiaphas and stuff. And then they are literally trying to find false testimony, meaning that they knew that Jesus was innocent, but they're bringing in false witnesses. And even within that, they couldn't find anything that would stick. And it's like, man, it's not just that this guy is innocent. They're working hard. They're working hard to try to find something that could stick. And of course, eventually it's Jesus' statement that they lean on.
It felt like to me that if you're going to go arrest him, you'd already have your ducks in a row back at the house.
Yeah.
It's like, so now who we got that can talk about this guy? Anybody see anybody? It's like, you're just bringing people in off the streets. Like, anything? It just seemed odd to me that they were kind of grasping after they've already made the arrest. Had Jesus not, spoke up and helped them out here, they would have had nothing.
Yeah, and that's exactly right in terms of Jesus speaking up, because it's at that point when the high priest, tore his clothes, when Jesus made the statement that, the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming in the clouds is when you're going to be, this is what you're going to be seeing from now on. It's at that point where he's like, all right, we've got enough. We've got enough to condemn him.
Well, it's only blasphemy if it's not accurate, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so there was no leniency anywhere in their perspective where this could possibly be true. It's not possible, or even if it is, they didn't care.
Yeah.
And so
I think the second one, they
probably
didn't care.
right. They just needed something to accuse him of that would stick with the crowd.
One of the things that I also noticed in this is the fact that when they are, slapping him and trying to say, oh, who struck you and stuff like that, that's for no other reason than they're just humiliating him. It's like they've had all this pent-up aggression. Just the fact that they're just strictly humiliating and trying to, just get their shots in before they even kill him. Anything within Peter's denials?
He wept bitterly, just extreme agony over the fact that he would deny his Lord, and I think that's important to note.
Yeah, because his response was not like Judas.
Yeah.
His response was, remorse, and I would assume within that remorse and within that weeping that there was this recommitment or confession and humbling of himself, because he will become a different man as he interacts with Jesus the next time, when Jesus is alive. So within Judas's suicide, one of the questions that I've got is, what would make Judas betray Christ? Trying to think through, like, okay, is this purely demonic? Was he just, influenced by Satan the entire time? or was there kind of human aspects at play? In the same way that we might become bitter, become jaded, or something along those lines.
Well, we know from Scripture that there was definitely demonic activity going on.
Well, and he was destined for it.
Yeah. Right. Oh, we're gonna bring that up.
You got to put it in there where you can. Point it out where you can.
Right. So from me looking at this, he regretted what he had done, but I see it as remorse, not repentance. It's and I make that statement based on what was said about him in 26. That it would be better for him that if he had never been born. Well, that's not something that is in keeping with anybody to ever find repentance. Because if no matter how bad this life gets, if you end up in heaven, it is better that you were born.
Yeah.
But if you end up in hell, it would be better that you had never been born. So I got to say, based on that he did not go the right direction on this thing.
Yeah, and that hits hard. It's heavy.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. So is this a type of rejection then of Jesus?
For him?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Judas was about Judas. I mean, and we see that consistently. It's he loved the money. He wanted what he wanted, and when it wasn't going his way or he didn't like the direction it was going, then he stepped in to try to alter it because it was not about Jesus. It was about Judas.
Yeah.
So before that, when Judas, he goes back and he's regretting what he did, and he tries to give the silver back to the priests and stuff. When they say, "What is this?" Is in verse 4. What is that to us? You take care of it yourself. And so he throws it, and that's when he goes away and he hangs himself. But this is interesting because later on we're going to see Pilate say the same thing. What is this to me? You guys take care of it yourself, talking about the Jews. And so in the same sort of callous attitude that they had towards Judas, it's being shown to them later on.
Basically, not my problem.
Yeah. And so you guys, don't put this on me. This is not my deal.
Do we want to spend any time broaching the subject of suicide?
I mean, we could.
And here's the only reason I bring it up, because there have been historical thoughts that anybody that committed suicide automatically, were fallen from grace, that they lost their opportunity to be in heaven. And I don't find that in Scripture. Again, the reason somebody goes to hell is because they've rejected Jesus.
Right.
Now, suicide, obviously, that is a sin, taking of life. But at the same time, we've already mentioned there's only one sin that is unforgivable, and that is the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. And we can talk about that again at another time. But this obviously doesn't fall under that category. There's other things we can say, but I just want to clear up that thought, because I think maybe in the Catholic faith it's been long traditionally held that anyone who committed suicide automatically went to hell, and that's not biblical.
I think for myself, it's a matter of if we're trusting and believing that Jesus, when his blood covers us and he covers our sin, past, present, and future, then this would be one of those future sins. And this is also obviously one of the distinctions that people make, at least logically. They're trying to say, well, there's no room for repentance or remorse or whatever. Like, this is such a final thing. And but yet, for the believer, even if they get to the point where there's depression or other things that are going on, to the point where this is what happens, the forgiveness has still been there all along. And so I don't see logically, even if this is what we're trusting in and this is what we're believing in, then I don't see logically that it can't be covered by the blood of Christ.
Right.
And to get to the next step, I just want to make sure that we're understanding too that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem every time. And I think for me, if anybody in Scripture was ever going to be suicidal, it would have been Job. He lost all of his children. Yeah. He lost all of his income, lost all of his wealth, lost all of his health. Basically, he was just in misery. Then lost his friends, and even his wife turned on him. This guy had nothing. He lost everything to the nth degree. I thought, if anybody is going to be suicidal, this guy gets a pass, right?
Yeah.
And yet, if we watch his story, it unfolds and God restores him. And so sometimes it's just a time issue. You can't put a permanent problem on a temporary solution. Give God time to work in accordance to his will and see what he's going to do. I know there's some situations out there that are difficult and tough, and people are struggling with whatever you might be struggling with. And my encouragement to you is give God time. He's got a plan, and he's got a purpose, and he's got something, and he's going to do something good. And so, relax, take a breath, and give God time to work it out.
I think along with that too, if you're experiencing those kinds of thoughts and you're going through things, if you look back, just a few sentences earlier where Jesus is extremely grieved, to the point of sweating blood, he's been there. He understands what that feels like.
Yeah.
And Hebrews tells us that we can, look to him
High priest,
because he has, empathized and
Right.
with all the things that we have dealt with.
Yeah, for sure. We hold on to hope, and hope goes through no matter the circumstance, whether it's like Job or whether it's, something that triggers us that is much less, really, when it comes down to it.
Right.
But at the same time, we also recognize in saying that perception matters and feelings matter in the sense of, to the person that is experiencing it, even though we may look on the outside and be like, well, this is not as big as you're making it out to be or something. We don't want to be so uncompassionate or misunderstanding to know that for them in that time, it's real, seek help. And, most of the time it's not a spur of the moment thing.
Right.
You can kind of see it coming. And so, when that, for yourself, make sure that, you're recognizing those things as well.
Right.
And not struggling alone.
Spiritual mental coaching helps. I mean, biblical coaching. It's and you can do this for yourself. You can coach yourself and to the reality, consistently tell yourself, it's not about me, because it really is not about me. And when it gets to be about us is when we start to internalize a little deeper and things get a little darker. Yeah. When we begin to realize this life, even if it's poured out in the worst way, if it brings God glory, then that's okay. And so it's to some degree, it's maturing of faith, coming to the conclusions that I am willing to suffer in this life if God gets glory. If that is His will, if that is His plan, then I'm willing to suffer. And regardless of what the situation is, coming to the conclusion that it just is not about me. It's about Him. And as long as I'm in this life, I have a unique opportunity to say that and to tell others that and to be a testimony to that.
Yeah. That goes way against, cultural today, especially American culture.
Right.
So when we're getting to Jesus before Pilate, one of the things that I thought was interesting is that Jesus actually answers Pilate where he doesn't answer the Jews. Although he answers the same way. He's like, you say so. Yeah. You're the one that's saying it. When Pilate's wife had a dream and she's kind of coming to him and she's like, hey, you probably shouldn't have anything to do with this guy. This guy's innocent. Do you think that was from God? The dreams that Pilate's wife had?
Sure, why not?
Because then it begs the next question. If they were from God, why would it be from God? Because it wasn't like it was going to change something.
That's a good question.
Well, and it didn't change anything.
Yeah.
So
why? I wonder why. Like,
yeah,
I thought I'm again speculation, but I'm like, why would God give Pilate's
maybe
wife?
that influenced Pilate to be like, I'm done.
Yeah,
and maybe that was the point, like so that he would turn it back over to the the people,
and then the people would say, "Hey, the blood on us."
Yeah,
because Jesus already said this blood is going to be on you.
Yeah. And we don't have record of what Pilate did or what his wife did in terms of responding to Jesus. He obviously saw him and acknowledged him as an innocent man.
Yeah.
Perhaps there's something out there in extra biblical writing to say maybe what happened to Pilate, but maybe God used it to pull them into the fold too.
Interesting. We go talk about Barabbas at all?
I think so.
Yeah.
And so for those who haven't read it yet, did you know that Barabbas' first name was Jesus?
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
Yep.
And it's, this is going to go down some rabbit holes here, but Barabbas means son of the Father.
Yeah, son of the Father.
Jesus, son of the Father.
Yeah.
And so we've got Jesus, the Christ, is how they've designated him to distinguish at this point.
Yeah.
Or Jesus, son of the Father. So that's the choice that the crowd had. You want this Jesus
or the other
or that Jesus?
Yeah. You want the bad Jesus or the good Jesus?
Right. Which is remarkable, and it can even get into a lot of different things. The scapegoat idea from the Old Testament sacrifices, and even there are some things they did with birds that would be unique, where they did one in one's blood and then release it. And there's a lot of different writings about how this could have been somewhat foreshadowed in some of the Old Testament sacrifices. But either way, it's interesting.
One of the things that I also saw too within this passage and Jesus's condemnation by the people, the chief priests in verse 20, the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and have Jesus killed. It's interesting how quickly, we assume that at least some of the same people were there from the ones that were, acknowledging him, at least as somebody special when they're saying Hosanna to the Son of David. Like, there's probably some of the same people. If they have any interest in him whatsoever and they hear about this, then they're going to be there. And so within that, how quickly they are persuaded, and it shows our herd or mob mentality as human beings too.
The flogging, it's not really spelled out in here how bad it was, but it is recorded.
I was reading that there was different levels of flogging, and they would even have different words for it. And essentially what it boils down to is that the word that is used here in Matthew is the most severe of the flogging. And not only that, but, the Jewish people and how they had, up to 39 lashes, but no more. But with Jesus, it may have been different. And so within all of this, it's a severe, to the point where many people would actually be killed in the process. Right. And so this was no light matter, especially when they're literally ripping flesh off the back and hitting and bruising bones and things along those lines. And so Jesus is not only in spiritual or emotional anguish, but now even at this point, he was already experiencing massive amounts of excruciating pain before he's even on the cross. And even just within all that, it's, again, still with the goal of humiliating him. They have the power to be able to do this.
Right.
And how humiliating, but yet Jesus is there as a quiet, lamb ready for the sacrifice.
And I noticed you've done some work on a cohort. How many was a cohort of Roman soldiers?
Yeah, the 500-600 people as soldiers like that.
A lot.
Yeah, that to me, when I looked it up, I hadn't before, and I'm like, man, that's a lot. Like, there's a lot of people here that are trying to, guard Jesus, so to speak. And it's not like he's putting up a fight and all that type of stuff, but it's like they're making a big deal about this, for better or for worse or whatever. But
when they gathered the whole cohort, and it was like a piece of a cohort.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
It's and I think that fits well into some of what was prophesied, even because they strip him and they begin to mock him and those type things. But then there's also they're taking turns hitting him.
Yeah.
And just abusing him. And so, I think it was Isaiah that says, visage was so marred that you couldn't tell if it's a man or a woman. And this is part of that process, that he was beaten so badly that, according to Scripture, when they finally put him on the cross, you couldn't tell what you were looking at.
Yeah. And that's insane to try to think, man, you can't think that, to see him, you can't tell whether it was a man or a woman just by sight. Right. Like that's incredible.
That's how bloody and his flesh ripped from his body.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes you think it's almost, you're like, maybe this is supernatural in the sense that he was able to survive it long enough to actually be crucified.
Yeah.
Your mind tends to wonder that and stuff. One of the things that I also wanted to mention within this is in Acts 5:28, the Pharisees and the priests, they're still saying the same things when you've got these other people that are preaching Christ and they're brought before the chief priests in Acts. Then the chief priests are still saying the same thing, saying, you intend to bring this man's blood on us. Like they're still holding out that they're innocent. And yet, it's like trying to point out again and again.
Hold on.
You're not innocent in this.
Didn't they say his blood be on us and on our children?
Yeah, the people. I think the chief priests were probably still denying.
Maybe
they had to be. Like,
I just assumed they were all together.
And it may be. You may be very well be right. But somehow, they're.
But yeah,
they're
that
also
is
trying to say
they're like,
we're innocent.
No.
You guys are still trying to pin this on us.
And there's also, as there always will be, remarkable contrast, between Jesus and everybody. Let's start with that. But particularly the disciples, whenever they're faced with fear of basically the unknown, because he gets arrested and they flee, not because they were in any danger necessarily at the moment, but just because they're associated and there's fear of the unknown. They don't know what they're going into or what's going to happen. And so, in their heightened emotions, they take off. Whereas Jesus, by contrast, marches forward into the known. he knows how bad it's going to be, and yet he goes willingly. Again, back to that prayer, not my will, but thine be done. And just the contrast there is remarkable, and instructional as well. We tend to get so wigged out about the unknown sometimes, and he's already given us an example of marching forward in full confidence of God's will.
Within the crucifixion, specifically, Jesus' death, one thing that I wanted to note is that it was dark from noon till 3 hours.
Right.
This was not just some sort of solar eclipse that lasted for a little while. I wonder what it was actually like and what that darkness actually was. Did he actually block the sun? Did he, was it just clouds, and storm? We obviously have earthquakes twice, at his death and his resurrection, but.
And why did that not get their
people's
attention?
Yeah. I
was
think
wondering.
something's going on.
Yeah.
What about the gall? Did you guys look up or know already what gall was all about? Like when they had the wine mixed with gall, as it says.
I read in a report that was given to me a few minutes ago that it might have been a painkiller. For those watching, Michael does a really good job of typing out some notes, and so I did read them ahead of time, and so I know things.
Yeah. So it was new to me. It was new to me as soon as I wanted to look it up too, because I was like, I know I've read this before as far as like gall. The word comes up, but I'm like, I've never taken the time to actually look and see like what is that specifically. And it's, it could have very well been in herbs. And if you guys can't see that, we had a plant fall over. It's all right.
I knew it was coming.
Yeah.
The gall was myrrh, perhaps, or other herbs, spices mentioned, and for the point of trying to alleviate some of the pain. But yet, because it was mixed with wine, Jesus already had said that he wasn't going to taste or drink the wine until he was in heaven. Mm-hmm. And so he's following through with that. But also, you tend to wonder, it's like, okay, well, this being kind of preordained in a sense, he's suffering even more. He's not even getting some sort of alleviated pain when he possibly could have. And it just kind of adds, again, layer on layer on layer on layer on layer when we peel stuff back. It's interesting to see. A couple of the responses from people in verse 40, it says, certainly if you can destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, you can save yourself. And so these are people that are accusing Christ, and they're saying, hey, you said that you could, destroy the temple in 3 days and rebuild it. So how about you do that? Like, if you can do that, then save yourself. And then the other statement, if he comes down off the cross, we'll believe, coming from the chief priests and stuff. And both of those, it's the first one especially, I think, how ironic is it? Because he is literally doing what he said he was doing. Right. They're, of course, focused on the temple, and we understand we have the perspective of Scripture to be able to tell us if we don't get it firsthand. He wasn't talking about the temple. And then not only that, with the second statement of if we come down off the cross, then we'll believe. My mind goes to, okay, in a couple days when he's resurrected, are you going to believe? He came down off the cross.
I had the same exact thought.
Lived again.
So it's obviously not true.
Yeah.
I mean, because coming down off the cross would have been miraculous, but getting up from the dead is more miraculous.
So, yeah.
And so it no matter what happened, they were not going to believe. And Jesus already identified that. Hey, look, you've got all the prophets and all the laws, and they've all told you the right stuff, and now you see it with your own eyes, and yet you reject it. And so no more signs are going to be given to you.
Yeah.
But you have the sign of Jonah, you know, and you're going to reject that as well. Mm-hmm. And so it wouldn't have mattered what happened. It would not have mattered. He could have split heaven and had a billion angels come down, and still these people were not going to believe.
Yeah, and it's telling for us today in the same way that, when it comes down to it, we can give evidence and we can have evidence, and even for ourselves we can have evidence, but it really still comes down to a matter of faith. Just like anything else out there, any other sort of set of beliefs or religion, it still comes down to faith. Science comes down to faith ultimately. Foundationally it comes down to faith in a certain set of, laws or origins or what have you. Right. And so within all of that, we have to believe and see, this is what's going to happen, this is what we're setting our hope on. And, if we're putting it in Christ, then we can see, the outcome of that.
But can you imagine rejecting all of the evidence being there?
Yeah. I
mean, it's amazing. Here's a guy that walked on water, controlled the weather, healed, cast out demons. It's everything that we can think of that has happened, and still the rejection. And now it's about to get even more weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that the darkness that didn't bother them really. From noon till 3 hours of darkness while this guy hung on the cross. And then, apparently it ends around 3 as Jesus cries out, Lama Lama Sabachthani, or to my God, why have you forsaken me? And so in my mind, again, this is Hollywood Randall, okay? In my mind, it's completely dark. And then there's this light that shines down on him and he cries out. It's like, I don't know if it happened like that or not, but at some point this darkness ended in that moment whenever he began to cry out. And then there's this earthquake. Did they believe after that?
And the veil was torn.
The veil?
Yeah.
No. And then, if that were not enough, dead people got up.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was one of my questions too, is like with all these bodies that were raised, many of the saints were raised, dead people roaming around the streets, how long and what'd they do?
Yes.
And then the other question is, were they the first people that, like, we've got these zombie preachers that are preaching the gospel? Mm-hmm. Like, are they the first ones that are saying, "Hey, guys, listen, this is I'm awake now. I'm raised from the dead because Jesus is the Messiah."
Yeah, because they had to have known things at that point, right?
Yeah, yeah, they'd seen some things.
Yeah. So there's more questions than we got answers in regards to that, because that is all we have are those two verses. The tombs were opened, the bodies of many saints who were dead were raised, and they came out of the tombs after the resurrection and went into the holy city, Jerusalem. Yeah. And appeared to many people. So this was not done privately or in hiding. It didn't just happen in the graveyard. This was, and so my thoughts are, and this is complete conjecture. This is just 100% RJS. Is that they continued to live. Well, did they go back to their grave and get back in? No, this was it. They were alive again.
Yeah.
And so they would die again later, just like Lazarus. He came out of the grave and continued to live his life. These people got up and was like, "Hey, did y'all miss me?" It would have been a weird night, wouldn't it?
I wonder if they had glorified bodies too.
Well, that Lazarus didn't.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking their resurrection would have been much like
different.
his.
Yeah, and maybe different than Jesus, because Jesus certainly did have a glorified body.
Right.
Yeah, and my thought also goes to how in the world would the religious leaders explain this one?
Yeah.
There's so many coincidences, so to speak.
Right.
The veil being torn, the earthquake, the light, all that type of stuff, dead people.
You think you had a problem with Lazarus. What if you multiplied that?
Yeah.
This becomes a major problem. And I'm just surprised there's not more written in regards to it. It's I would like to have more about that, because, lives were altered radically at this point. I mean, your granddaddy showed back up. He'd been dead 10 years. I don't know. It's just maybe it's people that died recently. I don't know. It doesn't tell us, but I got questions. That's for sure.
Yeah, I certainly would too.
Yeah,
maybe we can see a replay in heaven. And
pull out that DVD.
Yeah. When it comes to Jesus' burial, it's the women. We've talked about this before, but it's the women who didn't run. It's the women who took care of Jesus and cared enough, and all of that. And it's the ones who were there at the cross. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, of James and Joseph, and mother the sons of Zebedee, and within all of that, want to acknowledge that. And I think that's probably part of the reason why they were one of the ones that Jesus first appeared to, in a sense of blessing and reward in that type of regard.
I read that like if a writer was to write that a woman witnessed something, then it wouldn't have been taken as seriously. And so for Matthew to write that kind of shows that, this really did happen.
Yeah.
And he didn't care about the cultural norms. Like, this is how it happened.
Well, and he's already going, like Matthew in his purpose for writing to the Jews, so the Jews could see Jesus as the fulfilled Messiah. Then, within this, it only makes sense if he's trying to say, guys, listen, this is how it happened, and we're not going to leave any details out.
Yeah. I was just going to say, should we even talk about like what the resurrection means? Like, that's a big foundation of our faith. And so when it comes to the resurrection, what did Jesus accomplish with the resurrection?
The defeating of death.
Yeah, and as later on when it's put, he is the first among many. He is the first one to be raised from the dead. Yeah, the significance.
So the sin was covered with the death, and the curse was broken with the resurrection.
Yeah.
And so the curse of sin is death. And we've been told that throughout Scripture. Because of sin, death came, and by one man's sin, death came upon all men. And now by one man's righteousness, life to all people. And so that was the breaking of sin's curse.
Yeah, the reversal of it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the fact that we place all of our hope on it, because if there was no resurrection, then we are of all men most miserable, right?
Yep.
I like that one. But
Yep.
I also want to back up and mention the fact that the Pharisees seemingly understood more than the disciples. I mean, so that's how we know it's full-blown rejection. They understood not only what Jesus said, they put the pieces together. It's like, hey, this guy has already promised he's going to get up in 3 days. And they
didn't even call by name. They just said that deceiver.
Yeah. And so it's not like they were thinking, well, what if he's not quite dead? What if he's swooned? It wasn't like that at all. They knew that he had prophesied that after 3 days he would rise again. They quoted him in this. And so, they got orders to secure the tomb.
Well, to me, when I read it, I don't understand, necessarily if they actually believe that he would raise from the dead.
No, but they understood that he said it.
Yeah, they understood that he said it, to the point that he thought that his followers were going to come and take, they thought his followers were going to come and take his body. So the fact that he did actually raise,
Yeah.
I don't know that, like, how do you deny that part of it anyway?
Well, and again, the lack of understanding or faith, maybe for his own followers. And so even the women going to the tomb, they're not going there to see if he's still there.
Right.
Their biggest concern is who's going to roll the stone away for us. When they're going there, that's like, that's their conversation. Who's going to, and then they get there and it's rolled away. And and you would think if
and they thought someone stole his body.
Right. Instead of thinking, hey, he prophesied this, it's like, oh man, somebody took him. It's like, it is confusing to look at it and realize, well, they just couldn't quite put the dots together. And but the beauty in that is that God still put the dots together for them. It's the fact that they didn't understand completely or didn't get it exactly did not prevent them from having a close relationship with Jesus and having the salvation that he provided. And there's hope in that for us, because me and Aaron were talking about the other day, could the person that believes this thing still be saved? And it came up in regards to a conversation that we had with somebody who had evidenced a lot of work in their answer, as far as, if you were to stand before God, and he would say, why should I let you into my heaven? There was a lot of works answers in that. She's like, well, if they got the answer wrong, are they okay? It's like, well, here's the reality. We can be confused in our answers and not get some of the things, and still the grace of God is so rich that we can still have that relationship. It doesn't deny us having all of our theology perfect. Does not always deny us. Now, in regards to salvation, there are some things that I do feel like people have to know and understand, that they are completely lost and without hope apart from Christ, and that is the only hope they have. And so, but still, I find so consistently that people who I know to be followers of Christ and lovers of Jesus want to throw in there, I believe in Jesus, but and I try to do right. They just kind of toss in a little bit of works on top of that. And so, what are your thoughts? Is that prevent salvation? Is that just a lack of understanding? How would you rate that?
Well, I think that some of it is probably culture. Like, we are expected to, Scripture says that we're going to be known by our fruits, and maybe that's like a way of kind of like explaining, like, there is fruit. That's just me kind of wondering if there's some kind of explanation, really. But
well, and I think that when it comes to either James or when it comes to other things, that we're going to be judged, so to speak, by our fruit, and not only in the end by God, and so that's more in terms of crown type thing for the believers. But when it comes to us here on earth, and that's basically all we have to go by. Obviously statements, but that's part of your words. When it comes to the actual salvation, I rely heavily on that, Romans, where, if we confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord, and if we believe in our heart that God raised him from the dead, then we're going to be saved. And so those, in my mind, are the two aspects. Now, are there kind of like bullet points below that? Yeah, probably. But at the very least, this is what we are acknowledging, that Jesus is Lord, that he is who he says he is. And of course, understanding that, God raised him from the dead. And so within that is the gospel, like that we are responding to the gospel and what that is. And I do think that the works, it's hard for us because the works are an evidence of faith, and they're going to happen.
Right.
I do believe that if you're saved, then they are going to happen, and the Holy Spirit and sanctification has that work in us. But at the same time, it's not the foundation for our faith. I would say ultimately, yeah, I mean, faith is and salvation is relatively easy, if you will.
Sure.
But at the same time, the outworking of it in the sanctification process is not.
Yeah. Well, and so I think that's where confusion gets in sometimes with people who have not worked diligently to understand it at the Bible level, where they get confused. Okay, what actually is the salvation or the result of salvation? And so when they give these answers, sometimes there's perhaps nervousness even, they're being asked questions and now they're on the spot. It's like, and they want to get the answer right. And culturally, like you said, I think there's an expectation of behavioral change.
Right.
And so some of that kind of just, it blurs in there. And so my point is that I want people to get those answers right. Really, I want more than just get answers right. I want them to understand what the answer is, so that they understand, hey, it's not based on what you've done. It's based on what he's done. And so that there's not so much murkiness whenever we're telling our story to somebody else, or rehearsing the fact that how we became Christians to somebody else. Because if you don't understand that works wasn't part of it, then it's going to be hard to express that to somebody else in a way that's going to help them get there. So I have a strong desire that people get that right. But at the same time, there's grace in Christ. And so if you're still learning and growing, then there is still his grace is sufficient.
For me, it's a matter of, like, I try to focus, especially if I'm sharing the gospel, I try to focus on the fact of, are we willing to acknowledge that Jesus is Lord?
Yeah.
And because that is, in my mind, that is the key, in the sense that, if it's the surrender, are we doing it our way, or are we doing it God's way? And are we willing to be humble and surrender our lives, to him? And that comes in acknowledging him as Lord. And so if we're saying, oh, well, yeah, I believe that God, died on the cross. I believe that he offers it to me for, as a free gift and all that type of stuff. But in acknowledging that in a true sense comes with it, acknowledging that Jesus is Lord. He cannot be the Messiah if he's not actually Lord too. He's not the sacrificial lamb that is the ultimate sacrifice if he's not God.
Right.
And so it doesn't work if we're not acknowledging that in that sense.
Yeah. Well, and even with that, I think, going back to the works thing, if, you're not humbling yourself and, acknowledging that Jesus is the reason you can even do these good works, then you're kind of missing the point too, because if you're doing good works in your own flesh, then they're nothing.
Right. Well, I think as we get a more biblical perspective of who we are, then it comes with the reality of our desperation.
Yeah.
And until we fully understand how sinful we are, then there can be confusion, I think, about how desperate our situation is. And so we, anytime trying to share the gospel, try to make sure people understand that you're wretched. not my words. That's God.
Well,
right?
And that moves in, unless you guys have other things, I want to try to maybe end on the Great Commission.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I want to clarify, I try to do this because it hit me so hard when it was actually in Greek class, because we were kind of like parsing this out and trying to figure it all out. And the command that's given when Jesus says that the only thing that's in the imperative form and command is make disciples. And so what we know that by that is the other things are modifying how we make disciples. And so how do we make disciples? Well, obviously you have to evangelize. You have to go. You have to seek people out. You have to be where they are and that type of thing. You have to go in order to make disciples. The other aspect of baptism, that if we are baptizing people and so they are coming into the fold, so to speak, and they are acknowledging that they're associating themselves with Christ. There's not, we don't believe that there's anything salvific in baptism, but it is their acknowledging of what has happened. And so they're associating themselves and they're saying, yes, I belong to the family of God. This is my public declaration that I've accepted Christ as my Lord and Savior. And then along with that, the final step, which is the longest process of teaching them to obey everything and teaching them everything that I have taught you. Right. And that's our mission.
Yeah.
When we could go, we spend an hour just on that particular verse there, but I'll point out too that particularly in their culture, he's given this initial commandment to Jewish men who were going to be reaching Jewish people.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, it's going to expand from there, but the reality is their baptism for them was not just something they did as a religious activity at a church. This was major. This was a departure from everything they had believed in for centuries.
Yeah.
And so the baptism of repentance that John preached was a big deal for the Jewish people. And so for for their response to the evangelizing, for them to respond with consent to baptism was major. And so, we've lost some of that in our society where, so when Jesus is saying, hey, this is their, this is one of the symbols of response, it was major. For them, this was not something they just did culturally. This was a departure of their culture, a departure of, their family even perhaps, and would get them ostracized. And even still in a lot of your Eastern countries, it's to be baptized comes with a real heavy weight, and it can cost you a lot. And so their response was as a major response. I want to point that out. It wasn't just something simple. And in our culture, it's simple. And I don't know how to change that, and I'm not trying to. It's not that I'm trying to make it more difficult, but it is simple. Somebody calls, hey, we want to be baptized. We ask them some questions about their relationship with Jesus. And once we're certain that they have that relationship, we set up a date, we get them baptized, and everybody applauds. It is beautiful, and it's great, and celebrated, and I love that. But in this culture, that was not the case.
Yeah,
it was a
in
departure.
Many cultures today, too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so I just want to point out the fact that the response to the evangelism was radical. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just a little bit. And so in our society of, for lack of better words, the easy believism, which it is easy. You're right. It is easy, but the response should still be radical. And whatever that means in our culture, there should be some radical response to the fact that, yes, we're putting all of our eggs into Jesus' basket.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the comfort that he leaves them with is huge too. Like, he ends it with, and remember, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And understanding that the age that he's referring to, I believe, is the age of the church. And so from this point on, with the Jewish and starting in Judea and Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria and all the ends of the earth, that we're in this age. But he says, I'm with you. And of course, as we move into Acts and we have the Paraclete, the Holy Spirit that comes and joins in, and we have the presence of God and the power of God. Jesus doesn't just give them, he's like, dude, here's your job. I'm out. Did my job. Paid my time. But that he's saying, I am with you always. He's not leaving them.
And then he left.
Well, he did. Sent it into heaven. But he said that I must go so that the Holy Spirit will come.
No, I understand what you're saying. I just wanted to pull the funny.
Yeah.
Always has to go there.
Tug on the thread. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. Yeah. But yeah, grateful for you guys joining us time and time again. And hopefully it's beneficial to you guys. We've heard from several of you, so thanks for the encouragement in that regard. We love doing it. We love talking through it, speculating, all that type of stuff. Yep. But we'll see you guys next time. We'll be in Mark. So see ya.